To call James Harrison different would be doing a disservice to the word different. He was a menace to offensive players everywhere, and sometimes even fellow defensive players. He was the quintessential Pittsburgh Steeler plucked straight out of 1974 and placed into the late 2000s. His hard-hitting brand of football wasn't built for the era he played in, and yet he still managed to excel for over a decade in the NFL. Also not fit for this era was his blunt attitude off the field. The man routinely criticized NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell, calling him a crook and a puppet, which was probably the nicest thing he ever said about him. He said Clay Matthews was all hype, and he claimed the NFL was racist for how they handed out fines. He often voiced his hatred for the Patriots, who he said cheated the Steelers out of a Super Bowl win in 2004. In addition to almost fighting offensive coordinator Bruce Arians at practice one time, Harrison also called out his teammates in a Men's Journal article where he called Rashard Mendenhall a fumble machine instead of quarterback Ben Roethlisberger, quote, "Hey, at least throw a pick on their side of the field instead of asking the D to bail you out again, or hand the ball off and stop trying to act like Peyton Manning. You ain't that and you know it, man. You just get paid like he does." And yet, nobody really cared because he was James freaking Harrison, the toughest son of a gun in the NFL, bar none. All of this is why Harrison was such a fan favorite for so long, but also why he drew so much scorn from even Steelers fans. He was an enigma, one larger than life, but it wasn't always that way. Harrison didn't become the most dominant defensive player in the league overnight. His road to the NFL was as rocky as they come, and I'd argue only someone with Harrison's drive could have overcome the obstacles placed before him. James Harrison could have easily flamed out before reaching his goal multiple times throughout his journey, but through sheer perseverance, Harrison instead became the most feared superstar in the NFL. Growing up as the youngest of 14 children, Harrison was always an underdog. He and his teammate Jonathan Holloman were two of the first black people to play football at Coventry High School near Akron, Ohio. Harrison was a gifted high school player on the field at both linebacker and running back, but something always held him back, whether it be his grades or immaturity. He nearly fought an assistant coach and was thus suspended for 2 games. In his first game back, he scored 2 touchdowns and picked up nearly 100 yards on his first 3 carries. But he was ejected following his second score because he celebrated by running down the sideline and flipping off the opposing crowd with both hands. Harrison's assistant coach Joe Headley said Harrison was right in doing so because he received racial jeers all night from the Tusky Valley crowd. There was also later an incident involving a BB gun in the locker room, which Harrison went to court for. He was able to finish his senior season, but any chances at prominent colleges were shot, so he had to walk on at Kent State University. There, he dominated. He was first-team All-MAC in 2001 after leading the conference with 15 sacks. His final collegiate game was a special one, as he almost single-handedly beat Miami of Ohio, recording 12 tackles, 5 total sacks, and a forced fumble. He ended the game with back-to-back sacks on 3rd and 4th down, harassing future teammate Ben Roethlisberger relentlessly. But still, despite Harrison's dominance in both high school and college, he went undrafted in 2002. In addition to the competition level he faced, teams were afraid of his short stature. He was barely 6 feet tall and just 240 pounds. He bounced on and off practice squads for the first couple seasons in the NFL, as he was cut 3 separate times by the Steelers, and once ironically from the Ravens, and he even spent some time in the now-defunct NFL Europe with the team Rain Fire. After being cut by Baltimore, Harrison thought about retiring to become a veterinarian because he loved animals so much. Yes, this is still James Harrison we're talking about. However, a freak weightlifting accident by Steelers linebacker Clark Haggans in summer 2004 caused Harrison to receive one more phone call from Pittsburgh. Then, there was no turning back. Harrison played in all 16 games that season and both playoff games as a rotational outside linebacker and special teamer. He received his first career start in November against the Browns when Joey Porter was ejected for fighting Cleveland running back William Green during pre-game warm-ups. Harrison racked up his first of many career sacks in that game.
You know, I appreciate Joey over there fighting and everything, getting me that start, that pop in Cleveland. You know, that was really when they got a little glimpse of what I could do, and you know, I thank you. You know, I appreciate Joey Porter for that. You know, my greatest supporter.
In Week 17, as the 14-1 Steelers rested most of their starters, two future stars showed their potential, leading the team to a win over playoff hopeful Buffalo, as Harrison scored his first NFL touchdown off a fumble recovery, and running back Willie Parker had his first ever 100-yard game. Harrison's role only grew the following season. He had an early 4-game stretch where he had either a sack or interception in each game, with the pick featuring a highlight reel hurdle over LaDainian Tomlinson during a 25-yard return. Harrison's true claim to fame that season, however, was when he body slammed a drunken Browns fan who had run onto the field during the Steelers' 41-0 win over their rival on Christmas Eve. That's a sure way to win over Steelers fans' hearts. Still, even after helping the team win its 5th Super Bowl that year, Harrison was far from a recognizable face. Take it from Little Mike, who didn't even have to wait in line to meet Harrison at his local mall in spring 2006. It would only take a year for those people who skipped out on meeting Harrison to be filled with regret. Following the 2006 season, Pittsburgh cut fan favorite Joey Porter for cap reasons. The Steelers drafted 2 linebackers with their first 2 picks in 2007, but Harrison held off all competitors to land the starting role, and thus the beast was unleashed. The Steelers were instantly validated in their off-season decision, as Harrison dominated opposing offenses from the get-go in 2007. His breakout performance came in Week 9 on Monday Night Football in a 38-7 win over the division rival Ravens, as he put together one of the most complete defensive performances in football history. That night, Harrison racked up 10 total tackles, 3.5 sacks, 3 tackles for loss, 6 quarterback hits, 3 forced fumbles, 1 fumble recovery, 1 pass defense, and 1 interception, which he returned 20 yards. He harassed Steve McNair all night, and yet his biggest hit wasn't even on defense. To put it bluntly, let's just say Ed Reed never returned a punt against the Steelers again. His performance that night was given an elite 94.2 grade by Pro Football Focus. By season's end, Harrison had racked up 8.5 sacks, plus 1.5 more in the playoffs, and he was named to his first Pro Bowl in addition to being second-team All-Pro. He was PFF's 3rd highest graded edge defender for the season. But he was not just a pass rush specialist like many edge rushers are. In fact, he had just the 12th highest pass rush PFF grade in the league, but his run defense mark was actually 3rd best among edge defenders, as was his coverage grade. His 51 stops was 2nd best in the league, stops being tackles that constitute a failure for the offense. And he also ranked 2nd in the league with 7 forced fumbles. For his efforts, Harrison was named the Steelers' 2007 team MVP. As a 6th-year undrafted player who had just experienced a breakout season at age 29, surely James Harrison couldn't replicate that success the following year.
What I told you was true, from a certain point of view.
In fact, Harrison did not replicate that success in 2008. He merely one-upped it. Right away, Harrison showed that 2007 was no fluke, as he beat Texans rookie left tackle Dwayne Brown like a drum on his way to 3 sacks in the season opener. He later continued his dominance over Baltimore in another Monday night win, piling up 11 tackles, 3 QB hits, 2 TFLs, 2.5 sacks, and a forced fumble, which led to a touchdown that gave Pittsburgh a lead they would not relinquish. He had another all-around performance against San Diego, which earned him a 90.6 PFF grade thanks to his 4 tackles, interception, pass defense, sack, forced fumble, and safety. In Foxborough, late in the 3rd quarter, Harrison embarrassed Patriots left tackle Matt Light on 2 separate strip sacks of Matt Castle in a 5-minute stretch, both of which were recovered by the Steelers. Harrison was rewarded for his season by not only winning team MVP for the 2nd consecutive year, but he also became the first undrafted player to ever win the AP Defensive Player of the Year award. He was a Pro Bowler and first-team All-Pro again. His 16 sacks were 4th most in the NFL, and his 46 stops ranked 3rd. He racked up another 7 forced fumbles, which topped the league. He also led all edge defenders with an 85.5 PFF grade, an 83.9 tackling grade, and a 91.8 pass rush grade. He helped the Steelers put together one of the most dominant defensive units of all time. They gave up the fewest yards per play and points per game in the NFL, and their league-leading DVOA is still the 7th best ever. Harrison and Lamar Woodley teamed up for 27.5 sacks, the most for a pair of Steelers pass rushers in a single season. Not only was it one of the greatest defensive seasons in league history for a unit, but also for an individual, and I haven't even touched on Harrison's greatest play from the season. In Super Bowl 43 with 18 seconds to play before halftime, Arizona had the ball at the Steelers' 1-yard line with a chance to take the lead, trailing 10-7. And then, magic happened. Harrison pulled a Troy Polamalu and went with his instincts, dropping back into coverage instead of blitzing like he was supposed to. He picked off a pass intended for Anquan Bolden at the goal line, and he took off. With a whole convoy of blockers in front of him, Harrison broke approximately 267.5 tackles on the play, seemingly running in slow motion as he hurdled other would-be tacklers before he was finally brought down only after just crossing the white paint. Touchdown, Pittsburgh. It would be indisputably the greatest play in Super Bowl history, if it weren't for another play later that night. Regardless, the immaculate interception will never be forgotten. It is the greatest defensive play in football history. Harrison was rewarded for his legendary 2008 season with a 6-year, $51.7 million contract, which was the largest ever signed by a linebacker at the time. He backed it up by having another Pro Bowl season in 2009, and he was also named second-team All-Pro. He had another 3-sack game against the Lions, and 2 more 2-sack games against the Chargers and Vikings respectively, on his way to another double-digit sack season. He had the 8th best pass rush grade in the league per PFF, and he was the league's 12th highest graded edge rusher overall. He led the entire NFL with 49 stops, and he racked up another 5 forced fumbles, which ranked 3rd in the league. It was another great season for Debo, but the Steelers missed the playoffs thanks to a late 5-game losing streak, so the team came back extra motivated in 2010. Another year, another double-digit sack season for Harrison. He had 3 more multi-sack games in 2010, with 2 against Tennessee, 2 against Cleveland, and 2 against Oakland. He intercepted 2 more passes that season, and quite frankly, he might have actually had a better all-around season that year than he did in 2008, though he lost out to another DPOY to his teammate Troy Polamalu. Harrison's 87.5 PFF grade was 3rd best among edge defenders, and he also had the 3rd best coverage grade. He led all edge defenders with an 83.6 run defense grade, and he was the league's surest tackler with a 90.0 grade in that department. His 84.3 pass rush grade was just merely 12th best in the NFL. For the 4th straight year, he was top 3 in the NFL in stops, leading the league with 52 such plays. The same is true when it comes to forced fumbles, as his 6 were 2nd most in the NFL. He was once again a menace to all quarterbacks and left tackles. However, 2010 is also the year he became a menace to the league office. Next to the Super Bowl run back, Harrison is perhaps most famous for when he knocked out 2 Browns players in one game. He was fined $75,000 for the hits on Muhammad Massaquoi and Josh Cribbs, though it was later lowered to $50,000. After the game, he said, quote, "I don't want to injure anybody. There's a big difference between being hurt and being injured. You get hurt, you shake it off, and come back the next series or the next game. I try to hurt people," end quote. He was also fined $5,000 for an earlier body slam of Vince Young in Week 2. He was also fined an extra $20,000 for a late hit on Drew Brees on Halloween night. Finally, he was also hit with a $25,000 fine for hitting Ryan Fitzpatrick in the chest with his helmet, bringing his fine total of the season to triple digits. This is where Harrison's previously mentioned beef with Roger Goodell came into play. However, despite all the distractions, Harrison still helped the Steelers reach another Super Bowl in 2010. Trailing 21-7 in the divisional round playoffs against Baltimore, Harrison racked up 3 second-half sacks, helping ignite the comeback win. He also notched another sack in the big game itself, though it wasn't enough for the Steelers to get another championship. Harrison had his 5th consecutive Pro Bowl season in 2011 despite missing extended time because, the man had a whopping 9 sacks in 11 games played. He racked up 3 in another primetime performance against Baltimore. In addition to 3 more against Cincinnati. His 38 stops ranked 9th in the NFL, and his 13 TFLs was 16th, despite again missing 5 games. 4 games were missed due to injury, but the 5th was because he was suspended for knocking out a 3rd Browns player, this time quarterback Colt McCoy. Still though, Harrison had another 80-plus PFF grade year, and he ranked 11th in PFF pass rush grade. From 2007 to 2011, James Harrison had one of the most dominant 5-year stretches for any defensive player ever. He made the Pro Bowl in each year, and he was named first-team All-Pro twice and second-team All-Pro twice. He only missed making the team the final year due to injury. He racked up 54 sacks, 68 tackles for loss, 87 quarterback hits, 4 interceptions, and 27 forced fumbles during this stretch. However, all good things must come to an end. Harrison fought through a nagging knee injury and missed the first 3 games of the 2012 season. When he came back, he seemed like a shell of his former self, putting up just 6 sacks in 13 games. He was still solid against the run, but the rest of his PFF grades fell off a cliff as he ranked just 56th overall for edge defenders. The Steelers were forced to release him after the season due to salary cap reasons after Harrison declined a pay cut. Understandably feeling scorned, Harrison signed with the rival Bengals. Harrison's stats during the 2013 season won't leap off the page at you. He had just 31 total tackles and 2 sacks, despite starting 10 games. However, that's because Cincinnati tried fitting a square peg into a round hole. They refused to budge on their standard 4-3 alignment, and thus Harrison's best asset was diminished. However, that's not to say that Harrison didn't still excel at the role given to him. His 81.5 PFF grade ranked him 8th among traditional linebackers, and his league-leading 89.8 run defense grade was almost 10 full points higher than Dante Hightower's second-place mark. Despite his strong grades, Harrison was released after 1 season, and after going unsigned all offseason, he announced his retirement from the NFL on August 30th, and he officially retired as a member of the Steelers on September 5th. That retirement lasted a mere 18 days. After the 2 linebackers the Steelers chose in the first round since cutting Harrison went down with injuries in Week 3, the team called upon their former star for a comeback, and he happily obliged. And you know what he did? He went out and dominated again, even while playing in a limited role at age 36. He had back-to-back 2-sack games and big wins over the Colts and the Ravens, and he also had 1.5 against Kansas City to bring his season total to 5.5, despite playing just 487 snaps. He graded out as PFF's 9th best edge defender in the league, and he had above-average grades in all categories. He was the team's highest-graded defender overall. It was a nice comeback story, but he surely couldn't repeat it at age 37, right? Mental note: never doubt James Harrison. The Steelers re-signed him on a cheap 2-year deal prior to 2015, and despite the team taking another edge defender in the first round, Harrison picked up right where he left off as the team's best at the position, racking up another 5 sacks throughout the season, 3 of which came in a primetime win versus Indianapolis. Plus, he put up 1 in each of the team's 2 playoff games. He completely shut the Chargers down in Week 5 despite not registering a sack because he notched a whopping 7 hurries, which gave him a 91.9 PFF grade. His overall 86.1 PFF grade for the season not only ranked 6th in the league, but is also the 3rd highest mark of his entire career. It was also once again the highest mark of the defensive unit and the 4th best on the team. He also had the 10th best pass rush grade and the 7th best coverage grade in the league. You wouldn't expect someone his age to still be such a versatile player, but Coach Mike Tomlin was right to trust him. He returned the following year for his age 38 season, and once again he simply did not slow down. Just like Joe Thomas, Father Time could not stop the Silverback. He notched a 2-sack game versus Baltimore, and then became the Steelers' all-time sack leader since that became a stat in 1982, surpassing Jason Gilden at 77 with a takedown of Cody Kessler. Now there's a trivia question for you. He picked up a sack in each of the next 2 games for good measure. He finished the season with an 85.2 PFF grade, good for 8th in the league. He was 11th in pass rush grade and 5th in tackling grade. Reminder, the man was 38 years old when he did this. For the 3rd straight year, he was the team's highest graded defender, and he was second to just Antonio Brown overall on the team. He led the team in sacks, piling up the same amount as Jarvis Jones and Bud Dupree combined, and he had more hurries than the two put together, despite having 125 fewer pass rushing snaps. And he somehow got even better in the postseason. Against the Dolphins in the wildcard round, he had a whopping 8 stops on the day, routinely stopping runners in the backfield. He also had 1.5 sacks, the one being a strip sack, halting a red zone scoring opportunity. For his efforts, he received strong PFF grades across the board. Then, against Kansas City the following week, he did it again. He recorded a sack, 2 QB hits, and 3 tackles for loss. But his biggest play came by doing what he does best, drawing a holding call. With Pittsburgh clinging to a lead late in the 4th, it looked like the Chiefs tied the game with the 2-point conversion attempt. However, Harrison had beaten former number 1 overall pick Eric Fisher so badly that Fisher had no choice but to grab him for one of the most obvious holding calls you'll ever see. The Chiefs subsequently failed on their try, and the Steelers hung on to win. Pittsburgh re-signed the 39-year-old Harrison to a 2-year contract. However, things did not go swimmingly in 2017. The team drafted yet another edge defender in the 1st round in TJ Watt, and Dupree started to come into his own. Thus, Harrison played just 7 snaps in the team's first 5 games. He saw 15 snaps in Week 6 and essentially clinched the win with a late clutch sack of Alex Smith. But then he saw action in just 2 of the team's next 8 games, playing just 18 snaps. Harrison said he didn't sign up to be a cheerleader or to sit on the bench. He wanted to play. He claimed he did everything in his power to get Tomlin to release him, which he was finally granted on December 23rd. 3 days later, he signed with the Patriots, who had just beaten Pittsburgh a week earlier. Salt to the wound. This is the point where most Steelers fans turned against the man they loved for so long. I get why fans would be upset, but I also get why Harrison would be upset. You can fault him for how he went about it, but you can't fault a guy for just wanting to play the game. He got that chance in New England. In his first game as a Patriot, he registered back-to-back sacks on the final 2 plays of the game, in addition to a forced fumble. He played extensive snaps as the team made another Super Bowl run, but he finished the season still with just 2 rings. After that, James Harrison was finally done. He retired for real this time. Maybe. James Harrison was truly one of a kind. He was 40 years behind the era he belonged in, and yet he still dominated, despite the game's ever-changing rules restricting his play. He was an ageless wonder, seemingly getting better as he got older, still putting up dominant seasons at one of the sport's most physical positions while approaching 40 years of age. He was one of 6 Steelers to make PFF's top 101 team for the 2010s, despite playing the entire decade in his 30s. He dominated despite his unconventional short stature because of how well he maintained his body. I mean, the man claims he spends $350,000 a year on bodywork, and you can definitely tell. He didn't care how many fines he racked up or how many people he ticked off with his words. He was always 100% unabashedly James Harrison, one of the most quintessential Pittsburgh Steelers of all time, whether you like how his career ended or not. He's the franchise's all-time sacks leader, even while playing for a team known for its pass rush extraordinaires. He didn't even need a ton of flashy moves. He was able to dominate so often with just his famous but simple dip and rip move. He's also the team's all-time leader in TFLs, and he's one shy of Greg Lloyd for the team lead in forced fumbles. He's the third most sacks in NFL history for undrafted players. And of his 84.5 career sacks, 80.5 of them came in his age 29 or later seasons. Just imagine the numbers he could have put up with more playing time had his talent been recognized earlier. We've gotten to the point to where his career has become underrated by both Steelers fans and NFL fans in general. He excelled at rushing the passer, he excelled at stopping the run, and he excelled at dropping into coverage. He was an absolute menace, and he was no one-trick pony. James Harrison was simply one of the most dominant all-around edge defenders in NFL history, point blank.
Oh, and I'd like to also thank Roger Goodell for being my biggest adversary.